I want to preface this by saying I'm not the type of person who scares easily. My friends would probably describe me as annoyingly skeptical. I've sat through every haunted house and ghost tour my girlfriend has dragged me to over the years, and I've never once felt anything except mild amusement. I say this not to sound tough. I say it because I need you to understand that what I'm about to describe genuinely changed the way I think about being alone in remote places. This happened about 3 years ago in late October. My buddy Marcus had rented a cabin up in the hill country of central Tennessee, one of those private listings you find online, the kind with rustic wood paneling photos and a deck that overlooks miles of ridge lines. The plan was a long weekend with 6 of us, Marcus and his girlfriend Dana, 2 other couples, and then me, since my girlfriend at the time had a work thing and couldn't make it. I drove up separately on a Friday afternoon planning to arrive around dinner, except everyone else had to cancel. One couple got sick, one had a family emergency, and Marcus's car broke down on the way out of Nashville. By the time I was already 40 minutes up the mountain with no cell signal, I had a voicemail from Marcus apologizing and telling me to just enjoy the place myself. He'd already paid for the weekend. I'd already driven. The cabin had heat, running water, and a full kitchen. I've spent weekends alone before, and I actually liked it, so I shrugged, found the lockbox, and let myself in. The cabin was exactly what the photos showed. Exposed beams, a stone fireplace, 2 bedrooms, and that deck looking out over a huge dark valley. The nearest town was about 22 miles back down the road. The nearest neighbor was a farmhouse you could see in the daylight maybe a half-mile downhill through the trees. I made pasta, opened a beer, sat on the deck until it got too cold, and went to bed feeling genuinely relaxed. I remember thinking I'd gotten the best deal of anyone on that trip. I woke up at 2:48 a.m. because the generator cut out. The cabin ran on a gas generator, housed in a wooden shed about 30 feet from the back door. When it died, everything died. The fridge, the baseboard heaters, the single outdoor floodlight over the back porch. The cabin went from dim but livable to completely black. I lay there for a minute, eyes open, seeing nothing. It was cold enough that I could feel the temperature starting to drop, even through the blankets. I grabbed my phone for the flashlight, found some matches on the mantle, got the fireplace going, and then put on a jacket to go restart the generator. The manual was on the kitchen counter. This wasn't complicated. It was a backup start issue. You just had to flip a reset switch and give it a pull. Marcus had mentioned it might do this if the temperature dropped fast enough. I went out the back door with my phone light, walked across the dead leaves to the shed, and restarted it without any trouble. The outdoor floodlight kicked back on. I stood there for a second in the light, looking out at the dark tree line, and I had this small, strange feeling, the kind you get when you're being watched. But I'm the type of person who immediately explains that away. It was dark, there were trees, of course it felt like something was out there. I went back inside and went to sleep. The next day was fine. I hiked a trail I found on a laminated card inside the cabin, came back muddy, showered, ate, and read by the fire. Normal. Good even. The generator cut out again at 1:17 a.m. the second night. Same drill. I got up, made a fire, put on the jacket, went to the shed. The reset switch flipped. The generator turned over. The floodlight came on. But this time, when I turned to go back inside, I stopped. The back door was standing open. I had closed it. I was certain I had closed it because I'd felt the cold the second I stepped out and immediately pulled it shut behind me. It wasn't one of those doors that might drift open. It had a handle latch, not a knob, the kind you have to press down to engage. It was open about 8 inches. I stood there for probably 10 seconds before I went back inside. I did a slow walk through both bedrooms, both closets, the bathroom, looked under both beds. Nothing. No one. I checked the front door, still locked from the inside, deadbolt thrown. I told myself I must have not latched it properly and gone out before it caught. That's a reasonable explanation. I believed it enough to go back to sleep. What I shouldn't have done, and I know this now, I knew it a little bit then, was stay the 3rd night. My original plan was to leave Sunday morning anyway, but Saturday night I genuinely considered leaving that evening. I didn't because it was already dark. The drive involved 45 minutes of switchback mountain road, and the inside of the cabin was warm and the bed was comfortable. I'm telling you this because I think about it all the time. I had the instinct, I just didn't listen to it. Saturday night, I didn't sleep well. I kept half waking up for reasons I couldn't identify. No sound, no disturbance, just this continuous low-grade feeling of something being wrong. At 3:44 a.m., I woke up fully and lay there with my eyes open and realized what was wrong. The fire had gone out and the cabin was very cold, but the generator was still running. I could hear it. So the cold wasn't a power issue. I got up to add wood to the fire, and then I noticed the smell. It's hard to describe, kind of damp and metallic, like wet iron or old pipes. It wasn't there when I went to bed. It was strong near the front door. I pressed my palm to the front door, cold but not unusual for a door, and I don't know why I did it, but I looked through the small side window next to the door, the narrow vertical one that looked out at the front porch. There was a figure standing on the porch. I say figure because I don't know what else to call it. It was the shape of a person standing still facing the door. In the dark, I couldn't make out a face or clothes, just the outline. It was absolutely motionless. I stared at it for several seconds before I grabbed my phone and hit the flashlight. The porch was empty. I stood at that window for a long time. My heart was going, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. I turned on every light in the cabin. I found the biggest kitchen knife. I called 911. I want to be clear that I actually called and told the dispatcher I thought someone was on my porch. She was polite. She said the county sheriff's office would send someone, that it would be about 45 minutes to an hour given my location. I said okay and sat with my back to the wall between the fireplace and the couch until I heard the cruiser. The deputy walked the full perimeter with a flashlight. He checked the shed, the deck, the surrounding tree line, the trailhead. He came back and said he didn't see anyone. He did say, and this is the part I still think about, that there were boot prints in the mud along the left side of the cabin that he didn't think were mine. He said they were probably hikers or the property owner doing maintenance. Probably. He said probably. I stayed in my car until sunrise and drove home. I told Marcus what happened, and he contacted the listing owner who said the property was private and no one should have been on it. He seemed unconcerned in a way that bothered me. Marcus left him a bad review. I'm not sure what else we could have done. It's been 3 years. I have a rational explanation for each individual thing that happened. The door, the cold, the shape in the window, the prints, but I can't stack them all up in a row without something feeling deeply wrong about that stack. I go to cabins with my friends still. I don't go alone, and I don't think I ever will again. I work in finance, which means I spend most of my year staring at a second monitor and arguing with Excel. Last spring, I had a mandatory use it or lose it situation with my vacation days, and my friend Kara told me about a cabin rental she'd found in the western North Carolina mountains. A small A-frame at the top of a gravel road surrounded by woods, no neighbors visible in any direction. She'd rented it before and loved it. I booked it for 9 days, which was more time in one place than I'd spent alone since college. I'm 31. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in bad wiring, overactive imaginations, and the fact that old buildings make sounds. I bring this up because the story I'm about to tell sounds like something a person who believes in ghosts would tell. And I need you to know that I've spent a year trying to find another explanation, and I'm still not satisfied with what I've come up with. The cabin was beautiful, seriously. Tall pine ceiling, a loft bedroom, a wall of windows looking out over a forested ridge, a fireplace that actually drew well. The gravel road up was steep enough that I was glad I had an SUV. There was one bar of cell service on a good day, and the property owner, a woman named Helen, communicated primarily through a binder of printed instructions she'd left on the kitchen table. Everything from how to work the wood stove to what to do if a bear got into the trash cans. I liked Helen immediately, even without having met her. I settled into a comfortable routine. I woke early, made coffee, read or wrote in a journal until noon, went for a hike on one of the 2 trails accessible from the property, came back, cooked dinner, sat by the fire, slept. By the third day, I felt genuinely rested in a way I hadn't in years. I was sleeping deeply, eating real food, not looking at my phone. It was good. It was genuinely uncomplicated good. On day 4, I came back from my afternoon hike and found the binder had been moved. That sounds so minor. I know. But I'm detail-oriented. It's literally my job. And I had left that binder on the left side of the kitchen table, spine toward the window, because I'd been consulting the section on the wood stove that morning. It was now on the right side of the table, spine toward the wall. Nothing else was moved. The door had been locked when I got back. The windows were all latched. I went through the rational options. I moved it and didn't remember. An animal had gotten in and displaced it somehow. It had never been where I thought it was. I went with the first option because it was the most honest. I had been slightly distracted that morning, and I can't be 100% certain about where I'd set down a binder. I put it back on the left side and forgot about it. Day 6, I went for a longer hike, about 5 hours round trip, and when I got back, the binder was on the right side of the table again. I'm going to be very precise here. I had not touched it between day 4 and day 6. I had made a small private decision to not move it and see if it moved again. It had moved again. I checked every window, all latched. I checked the door, still locked. I looked through the entire cabin, including the small storage closet under the stairs. Nothing. No one. I texted Helen. Bad cell signal meant it took a few hours, but she came back saying no one had access to the cabin while I was there, that she was the only key holder and she was in Asheville and asking if something was broken. I said no, just checking, and didn't explain further because I didn't know how to explain it without sounding unwell. I should have left. I know. I had 3 days remaining on my booking and I had nowhere else to be, and part of me, the skeptic part, wanted to figure out what was actually happening. The binder was moving. There was an explanation. I was going to find it. That night, I stayed up late by the fireplace, and at around 11:50 p.m., I heard footsteps on the gravel road outside. Not animal footsteps. Deliberate, 2-footed human footsteps, slow and even, coming up from the bottom of the drive. They stopped somewhere I estimated to be about 20 feet from the front door, just outside the reach of the porch light. And then they just stopped. No retreating sound, no rustling, just stopped. I sat completely still for probably 4 minutes. Then I took a breath, grabbed my phone, and turned on the porch light from the inside switch. The pool of light showed an empty gravel road. I did not go outside. I am not ashamed of that. I sat in that chair until 3 a.m. and heard nothing else, and then I went to bed with the lights on. The last morning, day 9, I packed up my car and did a final walkthrough of the cabin. I stripped the bed, left the key in the lockbox, made sure the wood stove was cold, and then I found something in the storage closet under the stairs that I hadn't noticed before. On the back wall of that closet, in pencil, someone had written a series of numbers. At first, I thought it was measurements, something a contractor had left. But when I looked closer, they were times and dates. And some of the dates were from earlier that week. They weren't all from that week. Some were from months earlier. The dates and times went back at least 2 years. And the times matched things, or at least they could match things if you were watching someone. Early morning, late afternoon, evening. I photographed it and texted the photos to Helen. Her response took 8 hours, and it was 3 words: "I'll look into it." I drove home. I never heard from Helen again, despite 2 follow-up texts. I reported it to the county sheriff's non-emergency line, who took a report and told me someone would look into it. Whether anyone did, I genuinely don't know. I've turned it over in my head so many times. A previous renter keeping a weird personal log, a maintenance person with access, someone who watched the cabin and knew when it was occupied. I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer for the binder either, or the footsteps that just stopped. I still take vacations. I found a lake house I like that's in a development with actual neighbors. I don't rent isolated properties anymore, and I never ever book somewhere where the only key holder is someone I've never met. My dad's family has owned a cabin in northern Pennsylvania since before I was born, a small place on about 12 acres. up on a bluff overlooking a creek valley, accessible by a logging road that turns to mud in the rain. Every summer growing up, we'd go for 2 weeks. In the last few years since my dad's health declined, the cabin sits mostly empty because nobody wants to deal with the maintenance. This is relevant. 2 summers ago, I decided to go up and spend a week there alone. I was going through a rough patch. Nothing dramatic, just the low-grade exhaustion of a hard year, and I thought a week without Wi-Fi and with a lot of trees would do me good. My family thought it was a fine idea. My brother Eli offered to come, and I told him I wanted the solo time. I mention this because it means no one was expecting to check in on me regularly. The drive up is about 3 hours from where I live in Pittsburgh. I stopped in the nearest town, which is genuinely tiny, maybe 400 people, to pick up at the one store they have, and then took the logging road up to the property. Everything was as I remembered, except dustier and slightly more overgrown. The cabin smelled like old wood and mouse deterrent. I opened every window, swept the floors, got the water running, made sure the propane line to the stove was good, and felt immediately better just being there. Across the valley from the cabin, maybe 3/4 of a mile in a straight line, there's a farmhouse that's been there as long as I can remember. When I was a kid, an older couple lived there, the Harmons, and we'd occasionally wave to each other across the distance if we were both on our respective porches at the right time. I hadn't thought about that farmhouse in years. On my second evening, I was sitting on the cabin porch with a beer, watching the sun go down over the ridge, and I noticed a light on in the farmhouse across the valley. Just a window light. Someone was home over there. I thought, okay, new owners or renters or family members or whatever, and I went back to watching the sunset. What I didn't think much about at the time, I had waved in that direction out of old habit, and something in the farmhouse window had waved back. Again, 3/4 of a mile, across a valley in fading light. I was barely even sure what I'd seen. A person at the window, maybe, moving their arm in a motion that could have been a wave or could have been anything. I thought it was kind of nice. Neighborly. I went inside and cooked dinner. Day 4. I'd been sleeping well, eating well, reading through a stack of paperbacks I'd brought. Around 6 p.m., I was on the porch again, and I saw the figure in the farmhouse window again. Clearer this time, because I'd brought binoculars. I'd planned to do some bird watching. I raised them. There was a person standing at the window of the farmhouse, just standing there, facing in my direction. I lowered the binoculars. On instinct, I raised my hand in a wave. The figure raised their hand back. This sounds benign. I know it sounds benign. But something about it was not quite right in a way I'm still struggling to articulate. It was the stillness. Most people, if they spot a neighbor across a valley and wave, they wave and then they move on. They go back to what they were doing. They turn away from the window. This person just kept standing there. For the entire hour that I sat on that porch, every time I looked, they were at that window. I told myself it was a person who liked the view. Maybe they'd spotted my car on the property and were curious about who'd come up to the old cabin after years of vacancy. Completely normal explanation. I went inside. At 2:11 a.m., I woke up to the dogs barking. There are no dogs at this cabin. There haven't been since my family's old retriever died when I was in high school. I lay there in the dark listening, and it wasn't quite right for dogs. It was more like a sound that shared some quality with dogs, the sharp repeating quality, but the pitch was wrong, and it was coming from very close. From the slope below the cabin where the land drops down toward the creek, it went on for maybe 90 seconds and then stopped completely. I did not go outside. I lay completely still and listened for another 30 minutes, heard nothing, and eventually fell into a light and unpleasant sleep. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the property out of a need to do something with the unease I was feeling. At the far edge of the bluff, where the land starts to slope down toward the creek, I found footprints in the soft soil. They were facing the cabin, not facing the creek, not in a line suggesting someone passing through. Planted in the soil, both feet facing up the slope toward where I was sleeping. No trail leading away that I could find, which was strange given how soft the ground was. Just the prints there, pointing at my cabin. I photographed them, I went back inside, and I did the thing I probably should have done the night before, which was call the county non-emergency line and tell them what I'd found. The dispatcher was straightforward. She said she'd send someone to check the road and the property perimeter, and she suggested I keep the doors locked. They sent a deputy who found nothing else and said the prints were probably a hiker who'd cut across the property from the creek trail. Probably. Before I left that afternoon, I left a day early, and I don't feel bad about that. I raised the binoculars one more time and looked at the farmhouse across the valley. The window was empty, but there was a light on in a room I hadn't seen lit before, on the ground floor, the rightmost window. And in that window there was a shape I couldn't resolve clearly. Not moving, just there. I drove down the logging road, and I haven't been back to that property since. My brother Eli wants to go up this summer, and I told him I'd think about it. I'm not sure I can explain to him what happened in a way that sounds like a reason not to go, which is maybe the most frustrating part of this whole thing. Nothing happened, technically. There are explanations for all of it, but I think about that figure at the window, the way it waved back immediately, like it was waiting for me to look. I think about it a lot,